Let's say that Kevin Feige comes up to me tomorrow and asks for advice on how best to implement the X-Men into the MCU. It's hard to follow up the Fox movies. Not all of those movies were great, but so many people, myself included, grew up with them, and we are used to the cast of those movies. So Feige needs some help. Luckily for Kevin, I have a plan. A fairly detailed plan, in fact. It's not one that goes into casting or who I would hire to write and direct certain things, but it's the broad strokes, it's the storylines, the character arcs, what it's all leading to, and some of the comics and storylines that we would be adapting. And I agree with Kevin. And I agree with Mr. Feige. Doing the X-Men in the MCU is hard. They're coming in super late in the game. We had a very successful and iconic X-Men franchise that ended 4 years ago. And portrayals like Hugh Jackman and Patrick Stewart are so iconic that it's really hard to imagine other characters playing them. But I don't care. I'm gonna try. Last couple things before we get into the actual plan. This plan consists of a total of 24 projects, which is only one more than the Infinity Saga had. I do not imagine these all coming out back to back. I'm imagining it more as a movie and a show, or a movie and 2 shows sprinkled into Marvel's larger lineup. So that way, by the end of it, we have a story that took roughly 10-11 years to do, which is the same amount of time that the Infinity Saga was. I don't want to rush this out. I want to really take our time and build this story and build a relationship with these characters. And because there are 24 projects in here, I'm not even going to try to fit them all into one video. So we're doing 3 videos. I have divided this plan into 3 acts, as I call them, each act containing its own sets of movies, TV shows, and 1 holiday special per act. These acts are basically the same as phases, but I didn't want to use the term phase because these would be sprinkled into the larger phases. But each act tells a story that builds onto itself to a conclusion to that act, and each of those acts builds into the large climactic conclusion at the end of Act 3. And don't worry, I'm running through it all in release order, much like Feige would when he announces this stuff at Hall H. I'm not gonna make this confusing. Final disclaimer, I promise this is the last one. Some of these are more fleshed out than others. There are some ideas where I will give you a full story rundown, and there are some where I'm basically just gonna give you an idea of what it could be. It's not my job to write these, just to pitch these. On that note, let's hop into this finally. Okay, the first act consists of 4 films, 3 seasons of television, and 1 holiday special. The goal of this first act is to introduce the audience and the MCU to the world of mutants, especially because we are making this separate from the Fox one. Reintroduction is important, and I don't want to do any sort of weird multiverse shenanigans where we bring Fox characters in and say, all right, you better watch those movies, because we're here now. No, we are building this all within the MCU. So to kick it off, we have the first film, the Uncanny X-Men. And this would be a film that brings them in right out of the gate. I know a lot of people are kind of hoping the MCU takes an Infinity Saga approach and does some solo projects before giving us the X-Men. But the X-Men never worked like that from my point of view. They were always a team and a family from the get-go, and I think you need to establish that first before you can branch out their story at all. So I think the best way to introduce them is with a team-up film immediately. The reason I'm calling this the Uncanny X-Men is to differentiate it from the Fox movies, both in the fact that that was never a title for one of the Fox movies, and also because I want to show that there is a different vibe, and the word uncanny in the title establishes that. This is a more comic booky tone. This is going to be brighter and more lively than the Fox X-Men films were.
What would you prefer? Yellow spandex?
Yes, Cyclops. I would prefer that. When doing an X-Men film, really the first question that comes to mind is, who would the X-Men be? Who would be on the team? And I did some thinking, and I felt that the best thing to do would be to go back to square one from when the X-Men first started out and adapt that original team. And that team consisted of Cyclops, Jean Grey, Beast, Iceman, and Angel. And then, of course, you have Professor X. The notable character being left out here is Wolverine, and you guys will see what my plan is for Wolverine as we dive deeper into this, but I don't want to get too quick into a new Wolverine, especially because Hugh Jackman is coming back this year as Wolverine. If we're going to do this recast and this reintroduction to Wolverine, we need to wait a while. So we'll get there. I also think this is a great opportunity to spotlight some of the characters that did not get as much play in the original films, which is most of these characters, because Wolverine was the main character and the other X-Men were all just supporting players. At its core, I want this film to be a love story between Jean Grey and Scott Summers. I really want audiences to connect with and care about these two characters, because not only are they going to be the leads of this film, they are the two leads of this entire saga. That's right. We're doing Cyclops as he should be done. He is the leader of the X-Men in the comics. We are going to make him that. He is our main character for the foreseeable future. Now, on the villain side of things, it's much more interesting because I'm actually leaving Magneto out of this film entirely and introducing him later. So for the villains, we're instead going to be doing Magneto's acolytes. But we're adding a member. We are going to make Pyro the leader of the team. That's right. Pyro is an established villain right off the bat. The general story of this film would be that mutants are starting to really crawl out of the woodwork, which puts the X-Mansion center stage in all of this, because the X-Mansion has always been the haven for mutants to hide, and now we have this idea of mutants going public, and this other group known as the Acolytes starts to pop up, and they seem to be a bit more brutal, and they feel beaten down by society and are taking a more violent approach as opposed to the civilized approach that Professor X would be taking with this, for example. And I want to have aspects of what Bryan Singer was doing with those original films and touching on prejudice and racism and inclusivity, and I want to revamp it for the modern day. I want all of those themes to be there because that is so intrinsic to who the X-Men are. That is why they were created in the first place. But I want it modernized. I want to have some emphasis on social media and miscommunication and how the media affects the world. I want the film to end with everyone except Pyro and Exodus dying, Exodus being one of the acolytes, and I want humanity to be responsible for the death of at least one of the acolytes. And at the very end, it is revealed that Exodus has not actually been Exodus, but has instead been Mystique the entire time, testing the acolytes from within. And at the very end, she brings Pyro to Eric Lencher, setting up the Mutant Brotherhood for the future. And the final note on this film and the universe going forward, this is something so important to me that the Fox movies never did that they needed to do. The X-Men will have their colorful, saturated, comic-accurate outfits. In my opinion, if the X-Men are not the dumbest looking characters in the room at any given time, then we have failed to bring them to the screen. Well, moving on to our first show, and it's actually an animated series called Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters. And this is by far one of the most fun projects on here. And I know that for basically the entire time it's been around, the animation division of Marvel Studios has really been separate from the live action stuff. And we're going to change that because I want this show to directly connect into the films. This would be a 9-episode series starring some of the lesser seen mutant characters and telling smaller scale stories centered entirely around students at the X Mansion. The lead character of the show would be Jubilee, and then for her two sidekicks, I would want Rogue and Kitty Pryde. We're gonna keep them in animation for now. Some other X-Men characters would pop up. There'd be some cameos, some supporting roles from X-Men. Colossus is the one that I really think has the potential to shine in this show. And then we could have cameos from people like Beast and Iceman because we're at the mansion. And not only does this show give us the opportunity to explore characters who aren't the main X-Men, it also gives us a chance to showcase villains that we wouldn't really have a chance to deal with in the larger movies and shows, who just might not work well in that format with what we're trying to do. And we could have some fun and wacky villains and characters in there who just wouldn't adapt as well to a big screen. And I'm thinking every episode or two, the team could take one of these people down. Just a pretty simple, fun, digestible show. I'm thinking like 30-minute episodes tops. They don't need to lead to some big crazy finale. We can just have 9 fun adventures starring Jubilee. Moving on to the next thing, we have the second film in this story called X-Men Brotherhood. In this movie, the mutants are really starting to get public in this world, and Magneto is going to be the main villain in this film, and the title stems from the fact that in this, we will see him officially form the Brotherhood of Mutants. And I'm thinking of keeping the Brotherhood to the people we know. Mystique, Pyro, Juggernaut, and Toad would be the 4 members of the Brotherhood, his like main ones, and then of course there'd be some smaller mutants and a little army he amasses of people who take his side. In addition, the X-Men roster is going to add a couple more people. We're going to toss Colossus and Kitty Pryde on here, both crossing in from the animated show. They get their start there, and they cross over onto the team in this one. So that's bringing our roster from 5 X-Men to 7 X-Men. Now, Storm is going to be one of the central characters of this film. She's not going to be a member of the X-Men. She's just going to be a young mutant who pops up and takes Magneto's side over the X-Men's side. And I really want the publicity of this to pop up here. I mean, I'm talking public fights, Iceman and Pyro having a fight that leads to a fair amount of property damage. And by the end of this film, the mutants are fully a thing that the world knows about and the government is trying to deal with. As for Magneto, he would arguably be one of the leads in this movie. And I want Professor X to also kind of be a lead of this movie. I think that in order to tell a good X-Men story, one of the components that's required is a good relationship between Xavier and Eric. And I want to really flesh that out in this movie. Put their opposing views at the forefront. And Magneto kind of believes everybody should be mutants, sees himself as the superior race. It's the Magneto that we know. And I want Magneto to win at the end of this film. I want none of the Brotherhood to die. I want the X-Men to just not beat anyone. I want some people turned into mutants at the end of this movie. I mean, like, the Brotherhood just walks into city blocks with devices that can mutate people. Think of the original X-Men film if Magneto won, and kind of use that as the scenario of how this movie would end. And in one final attempt, Charles tries to stop Magneto. It doesn't work, and the Brotherhood just kind of leaves at the end, partially successful. The X-Men retreat and have to deal with the fact they suffered their first loss. No one died, but the world has changed now. So, kind of ending it on a cliffhanger. But what about Storm? Because I said that Storm is really important to this story. Throughout the film, she realizes, man, maybe I don't really want to be with Magneto, and she sort of goes off on her own adventures. She's not with the Brotherhood, she's not with the X-Men at the end of this movie. I want to put the X-Men in a dark place at the end of this movie. I want them to lose their first true battle. This is a battle for the future, and they have already lost it. I want Magneto to be shown as a legitimate threat. I think that would leave us in an interesting place for at least where the rest of this next portion of the story is going to go. And that leads us into our first special presentation. And this is actually something that was being considered at Fox for a while, and I think it would work really well as like a 45 to 50 minute short film as opposed to a feature. And that is The Beast. This special presentation follows Beast as he goes on a mission to save a young mutant that Charles found using Cerebro. They are experiencing their powers for the first time and they are dangerous, and Beast goes to handle it. And this mutant, who is accidentally causing chaos, because that's how it works when your mutation first starts to show, is being hunted not only by special forces, but also by some of Magneto's lackeys. This is Predator in reverse. Beast is the Predator, and he is going after the people who are hunting this mutant. I'm straight up thinking this takes place in a forest at night, pretty much in real time. Once Beast gets to the forest, we're just seeing it as it unfolds. It's a Halloween special. We're releasing this around Halloween. It is spooky season, and this is a spooky special. And this is the part of this I could see being controversial, but I'm going to explain myself. At the end of this, I want the mutant that Beast saves to be no one important. I don't want them to join the X-Men. I could see them cameoing in a movie or a show or in the School for Gifted Youngsters animated show, but I don't want them to be a major player. I want them to just be a mutant that Hank saves, just to show that the world of mutants goes beyond the X-Men. Alright, this brings us to our first live-action series, and this would be an 8-episode TV-MA drama. Originally, I wrote in my notes on this that there's no way that Marvel would let us do that, but I mean, we saw Echo, Deadpool 3's coming out, and Born Again's probably going to be TV-MA. So screw it, we are going TV-MA with this show. And that is Gambit. Now, I know some people would probably like to see a revamped and reworked version of what they were going to do with Channing Tatum. We're not doing that, because I have an idea that would be really cool. This would be a dark crime thriller character study set within a casino town, probably Vegas, because there's a lot of storytelling potential within Vegas and how big and high profile it is. Now, the action wouldn't actually be a major part of this show, but when there is action, I want it to be Daredevil levels of great action. I want an emphasis on choreo. I really want to see Gambit's powers come through. And I want it to be done in such a way that when a fight shows up, you think you're about to watch the greatest thing you have ever seen in your life. This would be a 8-episode limited series, and we're done after that. We're telling the whole story within this amount of time. And it would be a darker, more grounded story. We're not looking at world-ending stakes. We're not looking at anything too VFX heavy. This would be a character study centered around Remy LeBeau as he solves a mystery involving the villain Arcade, who is hunting and kidnapping people, sometimes mutants, for experiments that we learn later in the series. We're gonna kind of make Arcade like Jigsaw. I want this idea where he's studying his victims and he's building traps specifically designed around them, forcing them to push their powers to the fullest in order to survive. And the ending reveal of this show would be that Gambit has actually been playing into Arcade's plan the entire time. This whole show, Arcade has been researching Gambit from the shadows, but you wouldn't be able to piece that together until the very end. And then in the final episode, Gambit's thrown into one of his death traps and tells everyone else he's kidnapped that the key to survival is Gambit's head. And so now we have a scenario where Gambit has to fight all these people, but he has to be as gentle as possible so as to not seriously injure or kill any of them. And so, of course, he kills Arcade at the end of this and frees everyone else, because he's the hero. This series would be pretty disconnected from everything else. Don't worry, Gambit eventually will cross over. But I want this to really be separate and just explore a different corner of this world, where mutants are public, Arcade is exploiting that, and you have Gambit having to deal with it. And now to break my pitching character for a minute, this is the project on here that I would actually most like to see. I would love to see them do this. They won't, but I want them to. On to our third film of this lineup. It is a movie called Wolverine X-23. The way I am solving the Wolverine problem is by not including Wolverine. The introduction of the MCU's Wolverine is not going to be Logan. It is going to be X-23. And I know I said I wasn't going to be dealing with casting, but we're making an exception here because we're bringing back Daphne Keane to play this character. Not even as the same version, just because she was great in that role and deserves to play it again. This story will focus on Laura on the run after escaping the facility from being converted into a Wolverine. Yeah, Logan exists somewhere in this world. He's just not in this. We'll get to him later. Don't worry, we're not leaving loose ends with this story. I want to tell a completely Wolverine-focused story that also expands on a story I would really like to see expanded on. While not canon to the Foxverse, I kind of want this movie to feel as if it could be a spiritual successor to Logan. But that movie ends with the kids being free and going off on their own. And I kind of want this movie to start in a similar place to where that movie ended, where we now have the next group of people going after them, and they are now just a bunch of kids all on the run. Again, not canon to Logan, just following up on ideas from Logan. Laura is on the run this entire movie with some of her friends and ends up meeting some other escapees from the facility that created her. This story focuses largely on X-23 coming to terms with her powers. The way I'm setting her apart from Logan is that where Logan hates his powers and always dreams of them being gone, Laura doesn't. She loves her powers. She wants to keep her powers. She just has to learn to not feel this constant need for power. She has to suppress the animal in her to create the hero. The villains in this film are all very crucial to the growth of X-23, and we're gonna have several of them. So I want Donald Pierce to be in this. He's the guy that Boyd Holbrook played in Logan, although we're doing a recast, different version of the character, but he would be in this. Adam Harkin would also be in this, and Alessandra Morales would also be in this. She'd be a crucial villain. No connection to Miles Morales, though. It's a pure coincidence. But I want the main villain to be Kimura. Kimura is X-23's handler at the facility. And I want her to want X-23 back so desperately that she goes through so much, gets so many people killed, just to get X-23 back because she wants to convert Laura into the weapon that she feels Laura was always meant to be, as opposed to Laura who's trying to not be that weapon. Do you guys see the juxtaposition here? Good, I hope so. And X-23 kills her handler by the end of this, but Donald Pierce gets away. And I want Laura to exist in this state where she feels like she is cursed to be this monster. Her development doesn't go well. I want to put her in a dark place right out of the gate. There's a reason for that. We'll get into it. But by the end of this film, I want her and her friends to be found by Charles Xavier, teasing that they will cross over into the larger X-Men world. And that brings us to our next series for this lineup, and that is Storm. We are following up with her from where she left off at the end of Brotherhood. Storm walked away from Magneto at the end of that movie, but also didn't join the X-Men. She's on her own, and she's going on a journey of self-discovery. She's so used to being a villain that she's now confused by the fact that she is kind of doing heroic acts, and she doesn't know what that means. So this show would kick off with Storm returning to Cairo, the place she grew up, and trying to settle back in. She reunites with some people she used to know when she was younger. She's starting to get more familiar with her powers and more comfortable with them. And I kind of want her to do some just fun things to establish the community that idolizes Storm. Stuff like just showing her powers off to kids who think it's cool, who also really like her hair. Stuff like that. We're going to also introduce Psylocke in this show as a villain, and she's going to attack Storm and clearly be trained to counter Storm's powers. And she does massive amounts of damage to Storm's hometown. She's kind of like the Winter Soldier, but with powers. She is terrifying, she is deadly, she's not to be messed with, and she is clearly someone's assassin. And that someone is going to be the Shadow King, a character who likes to use young mutants to do his bidding for him. And Storm is going to have been one of those people. This would have been where she was before we see her for the first time. And this is kind of where her villainous tendencies come from. Psylocke was sent to confront Aurora, and now she has to confront her past. And I do want Psylocke to have a redemption arc. I want her to walk away from the Shadow King by the end of this, and for it kind of just to be the Storm and Psylocke show of these two women doing their thing. And Storm doesn't actually kill the Shadow King. They kind of cripple his organization, and then Storm is given the choice to kill him, but decides not to because she's better than that. And her and Psylocke go off on their own to look for people and help more people. Post-credit scene, they approach the X-Mansion. It's different. It's not something we've seen much. And I think it could be a really great way to tell a Storm and Psylocke story and send them on an emotional journey. I'm pretty proud of it, and it's one of the things I would most like to see. And all of this brings us to our final film of Act 1 that is called X-Men Magneto's Rage. So at this point, Magneto's Brotherhood and Xavier's school are both becoming havens for lost mutants. And also Psylocke and Storm are here, Storm training to be one of the X-Men. It is all-out war on Magneto now. He has become too big of a threat. The X-Men have to stop it. And I want to kill one of them. They all made it out of the first two films, and I want Magneto to feel like a legitimate threat. I want one of the X-Men to die in this movie. Xavier and Magneto are crucial to this story. They're not the leads, but they are just as important as any lead character. We dive into their backstory and their relationship a bit from before they were on separate sides of this war. And I want them to meet, at least at one point in the film, and just sit down and talk to each other. That would be really interesting. And the relationship between Cyclops and Jean Grey is also going to be important. I mean, again, they are the leads of this whole thing, so they're going to be the leads of this. And individual relationships are sort of the foundation of this movie. We're going to have Iceman and Pyro be a crucial rivalry. We're going to have Storm have to confront the Brotherhood. We're going to have Beast be faced with the internal struggle that everyone hates him because, have you looked at him? Every mutant in this movie has a personal stake for being in this movie. Humans' hatred for mutants is going to be increased in this. The X-Men win at the end of this. They defeat Magneto and they defeat the Brotherhood, but at what cost? There's a consequence to this. Magneto has impacted people's perception of mutants, and it is changed. There is a clear change from the first film to the end of this film of how mutants are perceived. All right, let's talk death. I mentioned it. It's time to mention it. I think a couple members of the Brotherhood are going to die. Magneto's going to live. Pyro is going to live. And in typical Mystique fashion, somehow she's going to live. But I think Toad and Juggernaut should both go. I think we should have a CGI fight between Colossus and Juggernaut. I think Juggernaut should die at the end. Toad can die in hopefully a better way than he did in the original X-Men film. And as for the member of the X-Men that's going to die, It's gonna be Angel. I think he's the easiest one to kill off. He doesn't have the heavy emotional connection that the other members have, but it would still be heartbreaking because he's been a member of the team this entire time. As for Magneto, how does his story wrap up? He's not killed, but he is defeated. I'm thinking a maximum all-hands-on-deck effort that takes all of the X-Men to subdue him and get the helmet off his head so that Charles can get in his mind, and the two of them have a heart-to-heart that stalls just long enough for Scott Summers to deliver a final blow that injures Magneto. I think Angel should be the one that gets it off. I think he should take massive amounts of abuse from the Brotherhood and be the one that is finally able to get it off after none of the X-Men can get there. However, while we lose Angel, we gain another, because we're gonna bring Gambit into this, teasing that he will at some point, hopefully, become a member of the team. So this leaves us with a new X-Men roster by the end of this film. It consists of Cyclops, Jean Grey, Storm, Psylocke, Iceman, Kitty Pryde, and Colossus. And then, of course, Charles. And in addition, we have brought in people like X-23 and Gambit, who will one day cross over into the larger team. And that is the end of Act 1. It tells the story of Magneto's Brotherhood and introduces mutants not only to the MCU, but also to the audience, while also setting the stage for something darker that is going to come in Acts 2 and 3. And with the end of Act 1 comes the end of Part 1 of me telling you how I would bring the X-Men and the world of mutants to the MCU. Be sure to stay tuned for Acts 2 and 3. They will be up not long after this video. But let me know what you guys think of this. Do you agree with how I did? Do you disagree? Are there some changes you would make? How would you do it? Let me know all of that down in the comments below. Also leave a like on this video, subscribe so that you get notified when the other two parts of this drop. That's gonna be it. Have a great day, guys.